Welcome to the DIY3DTech.com channel.
Welcome back to this episode. We're going to pick up a bit where we left off on the build phase of this. So a couple different pieces, move some stuff out of the way here. Notice that we do have the belt placed in. Basically, as you see, so the belt gets actually placed in by threading it through here with the teeth side down, feeding it out underneath both, and we'll talk a little bit about mounting this, but I want to go back over to these bearing holders. So one of the pieces with this, as I covered in the last video, was the big surprise that things are a little bit different in the version 2 than the version 1. So anyways, these do hold it pretty solid. However, these hex screws are designed to go into the melamine, and one of the things is the melamine is just not the optimal material to be threading into, because you just simply cannot tighten down on it. And these take a lot of back and forth lateral torque on them. So, and that was one of the reasons, as I covered in the last video, I had considered using these is to kind of lock it right in place. Use some basically wood screws or self-tapping screws, hold them down. Since it locks in the bearings, these aren't going to move. Now these shouldn't move either, because the bearing actually sits within inside this melamine cutout. Also, be careful when you tighten these down, because these will break. This is very thin melamine. I'll cover that in a minute. However, I want to get to the piece. Since the bearing does sit inside here, it's not going to move back and forth, but the torque is going to move these back and forth, and if it's only seated inside the melamine itself, that's going to be a problem. So what I did is I took on the bottom side here, and I added some number 4 machine nuts onto the ends of the hex screws. Now, there wasn't a lot to grab onto, but sufficiently enough to reasonably get the hex screws on there. So not a problem. So now this has a mechanical torque, so it's not going to be pulling against the melamine, which I think these screws would have pulled out after a while of use. So the other pieces that I wanted to mention is when you go about torquing these in with the Allen wrench, what you want to do is start here and then work across, then back up, back down. And so to torque this down evenly, so you want to go across, from here, here. So you're torquing these evenly down. And again, be very, very careful. These are very, very fragile. They will break, and especially if you're doing this with the machine screws on the back end. So the next piece is the table. So we got the table in. Got the table set up over here. The table will go on here. It actually gets flipped over, but I want to show you a couple different pieces. Had a hard time finding these pieces. They were actually in the extruder bag, so was a little bit confusing. And the idea is what happens is the belt sits inside here. Again, flipped over, but just kind of wanted to show for a little bit of demonstration purposes how it comes together. So we're going to take this out. Now, one of the other things, too, worth note, since I'm doing this a little bit backwards, not building the gantry first, one of the things you'll notice is that there's one set of rods, i.e. 2 rods, that have tapped holes in them. The others do not. Separate these 2 out, because you don't want these ending up getting down here in your bed. These go for the verticals, and so you want to make sure you separate them out. The other 2 sets are basically the same, and so I've got them set off to the side. So basically put, so I have, my 2 rods. They don't have things in the end. Basically, they get inserted inside the linear bearings as such, and a little bit rough there. I wonder why that is. I don't like that a little bit better. Might have to work it a little bit. That's a little bit tight. I don't know what that's pressing against, because it should actually move. I think I might have to loosen up this back just a tad bit. I might have pulled it down a little bit, and it might be pressing on this bearing. So let me go off, and I'm going to loosen this up a little bit. So again, something else probably to look for. Don't tighten this down because it is hitting this rod. This rod should move freely like this rod. Yeah, this rod moves like this. This one should move the same, but it's not. So I got to loosen that piece up. So let me go off and do that and adjust this up, and we'll be right back. Okay, so we're back. I think we might have some challenges with this particular rod. Remember, we took a little break to go off and look at this because it was kind of tight, and it still is kind of tight, even with both of these bearings. So I'll have to mic this out and see where this sits. But for the time being, what I did was just switch rods and put a new bearing and stuff in. So I flipped it over to do the table, and I think you can see how the table is situated. So these rods sit in the little pockets in the table. The zip strips hold the rods actually quite firmly to the table. Now it says you don't need to really use pliers to do this. You can get a finger tight, and I think they're pretty correct, but I just did a little extra pull with this just to make sure it's tight with a pair of needle nose pliers. And then I'll use the cutoff to cut them off. Also, notice that I put the lugs, or whatever you call these pieces of the zip strip, on the bottom side for that. The other pieces, you can see I've locked in the belt into these screw pieces. Again, I'm not overly happy with how this tightens into the melamine because it never really tightens, it just sort of holds. So, but it does seem to do the job. I may put some nuts on them later, see if I got some other nuts for this. So anyways, this is really what the table looks like now. So again, this portion, the bottom table, is finished. What we do need to do yet is install the top portion of the table with the springs, etc. that this will mount on, and this will be the bed which we adjust. So we're going to go off, do that, and we'll be back in a minute.